We are live on YouTube.
Okay, great. A very good afternoon to all present here. Welcome to the first session of the Distinguished Speakers series on the auspicious occasion of Teachers' Day. I am Akshita Barkundri from the Student Speaker Nexus, that is TSSN. TSSN is a platform of students, by students, for students, created by our team members who are from age groups 16 to 17 years. Our main goal is to connect inspiring speakers with aspiring students by organizing webinars conducted by experienced speakers from various disciplines and all walks of life. We try to help our fellow students to get clarity on various career options and wide spectrum of opportunities in future. Since the COVID-19 lockdown, we have conducted 22 sessions in which over 2,000 students have participated. On behalf of the TSSN team, I would like to sincerely welcome and thank Professor L.S. Shashidhara sir for gracing our platform as the first speaker of the TSSN Distinguished Speaker Series. We would also like to welcome our co-organizers from Bangladesh Eukaryotic Gene Expression and Function EUGEF group and all participants from India, Bangladesh and other parts of the globe. Our distinguished speaker, Professor L.S. Shashidhara sir, is the current president of the International Union of Biological Sciences, IUBS, Dean R&D, Ashoka University, and Professor Biology at IISER Pune. Sir is also a member of European Molecular Biology Organization, EMBO, and serves on several apex committees in global and national agencies that deal with science education, research, and policy initiatives. An accomplished molecular biologist and developmental biologist, Sir has received several accolades and awards for his scientific achievements, such as Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award and J.C. Bose Fellowship, to name a few. He has played leadership role in several large-scale science initiatives across the globe and is particularly fond of nurturing young minds such as all of us. Sir will deliver the lecture first and then answer questions from the participants. Please do post your queries in the live chat. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Akshita. Thank you all for inviting me to give this talk and interact with all of you. And at the same time, thank you all those who are attending my lecture and the subsequent interaction for taking time off on a Saturday afternoon for this purpose. I don't know how many of you are from outside India would know what is Teachers' Day means. I'm sure everybody knows what a Teachers' Day is. You know, in the world nowadays, there is every person, there is a day, Mother's Day, Father's Day, you know, and variety of that kind of days. And now there's also a Teachers' Day in many parts of the world. In Indian context, Teachers' Day is also a celebration of the birthday of one of our greatest teachers, a teacher of philosophy, Radhakrishnan, and he later became the President of India. And so, you know, as a scholar, an academician, and a great administrator too. So to commemorate his birthday, India is celebrating it as a Teachers' Day. And I wish my greetings to all the teachers who may not be here. I know most of you are students here. But teacher-student interaction is so important for learning, irrespective of whether it's a digital learning or in classroom-based, the physical classrooms. So in that context, the role of a teacher as a facilitator of students' learning is of great importance. You don't need to really look up a teacher as a mentor or a supervisor or a guide, and a beacon of your future career and all of those things. Simply a facilitator, right? So the students themselves should rediscover the world with the help of a teacher. That's how the modern education is all about. It's simply because access to information is easier compared to the previous world a few decades ago because of digital world and internet and other access. Still, of course, there is inequality. There are people who cannot access information through the digital world, but still it's far better world than earlier. So democratization of knowledge is much better. So in that context, every student would also be a teacher for herself and or himself. At the same time, the role of the so-called professional teachers like us would be facilitating you to learn what you want to learn on your own, right? So I'll just share my slides and then get on to the topic. So considering that we're all living in a time of a pandemic, right? The COVID-19 pandemic, which is considered as equivalent to Spanish flu that we had about 100 years ago, right? Between 1919 and 20. Now, in about 100 years, the world has changed so much, right? Although in the first 30, 40 years of that time was ridden with wars. The First World War was just ended in 1919, and then there was another big war, and there's a Cold War. And typically the world started transforming itself to more, equitable world, towards equitable world, not necessarily that we have an equitable world, but at least thinking started in that direction. More and more democracy was prevailing after the 20th century, right? But typically the late of last decade of 20th century is when democracy started, spreading to all over the world. Still, there are few countries which do not practice democracy, and so there is a value to democracy. Is not just about administration, management. It's not about livelihood. It's beyond all of these things. We think, right, for ourselves. That's what democratic setup will allows us to do, right? And in such a scenario, now that we are going through a pandemic, will there be a different world after this pandemic, or it will be, more or less status quo? Pre and post COVID world is more or less the same. It's just that this year, 2020, would be like a pause, right? Nothing happened. We just standing waiting for something, and then we get going with our day-to-day business in a very routine way. Will that be the case, or will there be something different? Or either there will be difference or no difference. Can we use this as an opportunity to do something different on our own, as a community, as students, as teachers? Can we drive some new change, positive change, right? Because of the current situation. So we'll discuss this. It's going to be more interactive. So I'll sort of spend about 15-20 minutes with my slides, and then we'll start the discussions. So what has happened during this COVID time? All the schools and colleges are shut without much preparation. Of course, few high quality, well endowed places, they could mount to online teaching and learning very quickly, but not all students were ready for online teaching and learning psychologically as well as technically, and their affordability for technology for online teaching was also a bit low, right? And the livelihood of people is affected. Then we also have problem of people losing jobs, and then of course actual health burden, and because of which we also have problem other healthcare system is being affected, right? So the access to nutrition, right, particularly the children of the poor families, it's a major factor which is not being discussed much. Or infant immunization. As you know, every child within 1 or 2 months of their birth, it goes through an immunization scheme program, particularly in places like India and Bangladesh and all Southeast Asia, where there'll be vaccination against a variety of different types of infectious diseases. And if it is not properly done because of the extreme pandemic situation where almost every healthcare system is working towards COVID-19 to address the problem rather than looking at other aspects of the public health. 10 years from now, we may actually start looking at a new crisis where children are, because of early age, if they are not properly given nutrition, their learning ability, their cognitive skills, their physical abilities may come down for a large population of many of these developing countries. Second is, in the absence of immunizations, the earlier diseases may resurface and may become a problem at a larger scale, right? So some of these things we need to look into it. We may have to think about it in the next 5 to 10 years. there will be the impact of COVID-19 even after, let's say vaccination comes, and then everybody is immunized either through, the natural way of getting immunization or by vaccination. In either way, the impact of COVID, even after this particular pandemic subsides, will continue, right? So we need to think differently about post-COVID-19 world, although 99% of the people may not get affected so much, right? And all of us who can afford a particular way of living, we may continue to live in the same way. But still, 1% is not a small number. We can always say, oh, 99%, or, everything is normal, let the world be as it is. It's not true. That number-wise, that 1% is still a large number. Look at in Indian context, 1.38 billion people, right? And between India and Southeast Asia, we are close to about, let's say, even if you exclude China, we are talking about 2 billion people, right? 1% means basically we are talking about 20 million people, right? 20 million people is a very large number if they get badly affected, right? It should affect our conscience, and if, we need to do something about it to alleviate that problem. So if coming to education, right? So in Indian context, and even other South Asian countries context, we are not fully exploited our demography, right? India is, for example, it's more than 40% of our population is an age group which is actually still a student age group, formal student age. All of us are supposed to be students our whole life. It's called lifelong learning. But in the context of formal education, it's still a large group between 5 to 35 age group up to, let's say, higher education, end of higher education, let's say go up to PhD. There are about 30 years age group. There are a huge number of people, close to about 400 to 500 million people. That's a big number, but we have not given high quality or even a higher education to a very large section of that, right? And if you look at how many of the students after finishing their school get into higher education, in India it is still only about 26%. In China it's close to about 40%. In most developed countries it's somewhere between 60 to 65%, right? In some countries up to 80%. Now, as you can make out, higher education itself is not accessible to a very large number of people, right? But we need to, provide that, higher education, both in terms of quality and actually access to higher education itself. So much of future, effort in the next 10 to 15 years is to reduce this gap between the school education and the higher education. And for that to happen, we need large number of higher education institutes, large number of teachers. So one career which is going to be for sure will remain for a very long time is actually education related careers, right? So, setting up new schools and colleges, becoming teachers, becoming education experts in terms of policy, in terms of communications, in terms of writing textbook, those who can actually develop new innovative curriculum, new innovative pedagogy, teachers training, right? And skills development for students. There will be some, what known as extracurricular activities for the students for their additional skills, transferable skills, right? All of these things are going to be part of their new career for existing students, right? So education itself will drive education related career. That itself will also really have a new dimension to it because of the digitization of the education and new education policy that has come up very recently in India and going to influence largely the career related to education. And that's also true for obviously science education, because science and technology is going to drive the much of the higher education scenario in India and also the rest of the world, right? So one thing we need to ensure in education is we should make our students equipped their ability to solve the problem rather than just remembering what is already known, right? We don't need to remember nowadays anything that's already known, is because you have a hand, smartphone, or even access to a variety of different ways of information in a digital world. Really, what you need to know is how to learn how to solve problems, how to connect what you have known to the real life problems, right? It could be scientific problem to research on something is already known to the next level of knowledge, what's called pushing the frontiers, right? Or it could be applied where you apply your knowledge, whatever you have learned, to solve the problem, right? So as teachers, we should be aware of this, right? We should be aware that we cannot teach our students what we learned yesterday. For example, I went to undergraduate college in 1980s, early 80s. Now I can't teach what I learned in 1980s. I can't teach the way I learned in 1980s to the students of today who will be, getting into some new career which may not even exist today, right? So how do you even make students prepare for their future, which the future we don't know anything about, right? For example, just look at the internet itself. The much of internet started in late 90s and in the 21st century. When we were doing our, education, we didn't know anything about internet. That we didn't know that there will be such a thing will happen in our near future. It was all science fiction, right? So how is that, people like us should get prepared for a world which we don't know that will come in, right? This because if your education has a component of self-learning ability, I'll come to that in a minute, right? And problem-solving ability. So hopefully you should be able to, be adaptable to changing situation. So what are the things that you need to have, which we teachers need to facilitate that you develop these skills? In fact, you don't need to worry too much about what are your skills in physics, chemistry, mathematics, or biology, in engineering, kind of thing. What skills you need, those are all the domain-specific skills, which are of course required in that particular career. Beyond all of these things, you need what are known as transferable skills. What are those? Analytical ability to verify the knowledge, right? As you know, the knowledge is spreading through multiple media, including social media. And how do you know what is true, what is false, right? And one of the major problems that you're going to face is filtering the knowledge itself, right? In fact, there will be more and more careers in communication, both science communication and in general communication. And the major skills that is required there is to ensure that what you communicate will not get distorted. What you communicate is not a distorted version of information. And at the same time, when you relay communication, right, you need to ensure that you filter in such a way that all the false information is get filtered out, right? So that itself, one has to develop those skills to do that. And of course, your problem-solving ability, critical thinking, self-learning ability, and so forth. Why self-learning is so important amongst all the skills is, what you learn today may not be useful for tomorrow. Tomorrow you may have to learn something entirely new because it's a changing world. It's a fast changing world, right? Compared to 50 years ago. And so in that context, if you know how to learn, right, all your problems get solved. Because whenever there's a problem, you find a solution by learning it on your own, looking for right information, looking for correct knowledge in the domain specific information like physics, chemistry, engineering, and so forth. And then you know how to apply that knowledge to solve the problem. It could be academic problem, it could be real life problem, right? Now, in the context of pre and post pandemic, you just look at it. Everybody's thinking, oh, particularly May, June was really, this was very bleak, the situation. With the total lockdown, the whole of the country was really struggling. Even today, we are struggling. Large number of, small companies, micro and small companies, or even medium-sized companies have almost become bankrupt. Many students whose parents have become bankrupt can't go to higher education, paying fees for engineering or medicine or whatever, right? It's also affecting not just the laborers or migrant laborers. It's also affecting the middle class and lower middle class, and it's a very large number, right? And then how one can address such a problem and solve this, right? Compared to what happened 100 years ago when there was a pandemic, Spanish flu. The one way of we could address this very well is because even before this COVID-19 pandemic broke out, the science per se was not practiced in isolation. Science was already globalized. Scientists were global citizens. Scientists cannot be considered themselves as I'm an American scientist or an Indian scientist or a Bangladeshi scientist. We are all just scientists, right? Like true, the word citizens in the spirit of Rabindranath Tagore, right? He himself was a teacher, by the way. And what Rabindranath Tagore was preaching was, including one Gandhiji. Gandhiji, of course, was a political figure, fought the freedom struggle and so forth, right? He led the freedom struggle of India. But Gandhiji was actually a universal, person. He was aspiring for universal citizenship and not for any particular, boundary specific citizenship. Scientists are actually, in a way, that way truly, global citizens, because whatever they do immediately, they spread to the entire world, so that whole world will know, and the science will progress because based on the work that we have done, right? The cooperation sometimes will be direct, sometimes indirect. For example, if I do some research and publish in a research paper, and if other people can read and then benefit from this and do more research, already I'm helping them. But I may not be directly talking to them, but I'll be indirectly talking to them through my publications. But there are also direct, cooperation and collaboration. So science was already a universal, and a more team-based, research enterprise rather than individual research enterprise like way, 100 years ago when Einstein did his work, or before that Newton or Galileo, right? Those figures were all mostly individuals out of that passion were doing it. But now modern science is actually teamwork. It is sponsored by, governments or some funding agencies, and everybody work together to promote science, right? Now, during COVID-19, this actually benefited a lot because scientists are already talking to each other all the time. As soon as there was an outbreak of pandemic, everybody came to know about it. Everybody knew what it is about, what kind of virus it is. And immediately the samples were, shared. People could sequence the viral genome, so look at what kind of protein it is, what is spike protein means, and which human protein it binds, how it enters into human cells, which type of cells are more, susceptible to the virus entry, what happens once the virus gets into the, human cells. All of these things were studied by end of January. As you know, the first COVID official, report came in China on 31st December. By end of January, we knew a lot about this virus. Of course, because it's a new coronavirus and a lot of, earlier coronavirus traits were carried. So in a way, 80 to 90% of information is already known. But the remaining 10% is because the new coronavirus was also discovered very quickly. By February, already people started thinking of vaccines against this because they thought that it may become a pandemic, right? Although most countries at that time were still happily living, saying that, oh, it may not come to us. Italy never thought that in February. I was in France, in the middle of February, and nowhere there was any indication that people are very scared that there may be a viral outbreak. And by end of February and beginning of March, and the entire France was affected, and Paris was very badly affected. So as you can make out, all of these information and then additional work that people did to alleviate the problem. In fact, if India and many of the South Asian countries benefited much more than the developed countries, because of the information was so easily accessible to everybody. So what is called democratization of information, right? Because ours was a late entry, of the virus in the Indian context. By the time we knew so much about what happened in New York hospital, London hospital, in Paris, Madrid, or in Italy, and we could actually be prepared to save lives. If India had fewer, people dying, one is of course inherent genetic and other environmental factors, but much more than that is also because so many different methods of treatment, so many different ways of saving lives were already known to us because of the experience of other people. And now, of course, vaccines are very close, somewhere, not too far from now, there will be vaccine. It simply began, so many people are working together, right? from US to UK and India, every scientist and vaccine producer and manufacturer, they're all working together. And that's one of the reasons why COVID-19 may not be as bad as Spanish flu 100 years ago. Of course, it'll be very bad because of the way we live today. We all jet setters, we travel a lot, and we go to restaurants, eat out, we, buy a lot of things. And at the same time, we also have an economy which is so much dependent on international trade. And because of the pandemic, everything is affected. And that's one of the reasons economic fallout is much bigger now compared to the earlier time. Although the loss of life, is not so much, right? So anyway, as the disease is finally, how it damages the human being rather than, how it affects the economy, right? But the post-COVID, we need to resurrect economy of the world, and that's where the new type of career opportunities will come up. Anyway, so I'll just skip this, right? Dr. Santosh Dikshit asked me to talk a little bit about national education policy. National education policy was it took about 2 years to come out with this, and most of it, what is written, it was the pre-COVID time. But the way it was written and for purpose for it written, actually it's not going to make much difference whether it's the pre-COVID or post-COVID. One is like digitization of learning, multidisciplinarity, inquiry-driven learning, and the skills should be more critical thinking and creativity, innovation. It's all standard ones. I mean, there's no much difference between whether you are living in during the pandemic, what happens, before the pandemic or after the pandemic, and so forth. So, because the Teachers' Day, I just want to mention this. A teacher's role is here more of a facilitator, and because the student should learn, critical thinking and self-learning ability. Obviously, you cannot spoon feed students. So the teacher's role has to be facilitator, that students learn on their own, rather than we try to teach them and ask them to memorize certain things, right? And same thing, knowledge has to be, knowledge construction is such that students actually build in an inquiry-based learning, process, rather than, when we spoon feed and try to simplify the concepts in such a way that somehow they learn and remember it. Instead, you ask the students to rebuild. For example, you want to understand, let's say, black body radiation, what it means. So the way people discovered it, in the same way you also explain to them. So students will learn that better. Same thing, whether it's Galileo's principles or, how Newton discovered his, laws of motion, right? Or genetics, how Mendel discovered his laws of genetics. If you explain the way Mendel was thinking when he was doing his experiment, it'll be easier for you, because you are it's a thought experiment, but you are reconstructing the process by which Mendel derived the laws of genetics or laws of inheritance, rather than trying to start with the end results of Mendel's work and saying that, try to remember somehow that monohybrid ratio is 3:1, right? What is 3:1 has really no meaning unless you know how it is derived, right? So there will be, under new education policy, there will be more and more liberal arts program. So the students will have a choice of very broad subjects across all disciplines. Many of you students may think that I want to become an engineer, I want to become an expert in artificial intelligence and machine learning. But as you know, artificial intelligence is only a tool. What do you do with that? Learning a bit of algorithm of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is something where it has to be customized to the problem. If you don't know what the problem on which you want to work on, right, you cannot customize your software to that problem, right? It's not like an operating system, just leave it on the computer and say that let people do whatever they want to do, right? But you're not writing an operating system. You are actually customizing, your software such that it starts, improvising on its own. That's why it's called artificial intelligence, and then tries to solve the problem. And what is the problem you're going to solve? The problem of water availability, or or the quality of the water, or it could be rainfall patterns. It could be the distribution of the food, food grains across a country like ours, like 1.3 billion people, how food is produced and distributed across the country, right? So how do you even solve this problem unless you know what the problem is? You should know economics, you may need to know social science, you may have to do a bit of agriculture, you should know transport mechanism, how people, how it works, right? How the business of transport system works. All of these things you need to learn, or at least one or two domain specific knowledge you should have in addition to, your specific interests like computer science or physics or chemistry. So a liberal arts program is the one which actually provides that kind of way of thinking, right? So that what you do, you can actually apply to a real life problem, right? The same thing, even if you want to do academic research, let's say you want to become pure scientist, you want to know more about stars and universe and quasars or black holes, or you want to know more about how a cell, the very different components within a cell move around a little bit here and there, right? Even there, you need to understand that there are two types of research. One is called qualitative research and the quantitative research. For example, in the beginning, what Einstein did was qualitative research, and then later he started using mathematics to explain his qualitative research in a quantitative way, right? So the qualitative research principles are very important to understand human body or life or even origin of life, evolution. At the same time, quantitative skills like statistics, mathematics are also important to generalize that one across different conditions, right? So in that way, you will learn a lot about qualitative research when you also learn a bit of social science and humanities, because generally they are the ones who actually have taken the qualitative science to the next level of high quality, right? The second one is there will be less, the syllabus should be in such that what you learn will have a more global acceptance of the specific knowledge domains that you study, right? Rather than, trying to sort of study on your own. So we cannot be isolated from rest of the world when we study something. So the syllabus also should have a more alignment to the changes that's happening in the world, right? So in that context, there is the syllabi are highly dynamic. It will continuously change, right? So in that context, again, a teacher should not rely on just one textbook and one old pattern of teaching. So both the teachers and the educators or policy makers have to work together to ensure that the students every year, new students may come, they are better prepared than the previous year. Because with the changing time, we'll have more information how to make the students better prepared for their future, right? Okay, I think I'll skip some of these things, may not be so important for the student population here, that we teachers have to do all of these things, right? Now, what would be the future like when you will go there, right? Just look at the past to some extent. Look at the developing countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and all other South Asian countries like Sri Lanka, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, right? All of us give special emphasis to only certain types of skills and certain kind of job-oriented, education, right? That's reason because in a low economy countries, your job security becomes more important because of economic insecurity, right? So invariably look for a permanent job, right? And this means you go for an education to get a job. You go to an engineering college because you get a job. You go to medical college because you get a job. You go to economics, commerce because you may get into a job in bank or in railways or somewhere, right? All of you, I'm not you particularly an audience, but large number of students in the world, at least in the world of ours, would be looking for a permanent job or were looking for a permanent job. And that leads to factory mode, large scale production of degree holders, right? So for example, if you go to an engineering college, and let's say if you do computer science or civil engineering, mechanical engineering, at the end of the day, 200 students will come out. All of them may look exactly the same. But that's not an ideal education system, because education should be personalized, customized outcomes should be there. In the absence of that, the system becomes less flexible and more rigid, and it will not be able to adapt to changing situations. Right? It's already happening. Why is, in spite of largest number of computer engineers in this country, although computer engineering became very popular in almost in 1980s in this country, about 40 years ago, when it comes to artificial intelligence, machine learning, we are far behind. Why is that we couldn't catch up? It's simply because we made the education so inflexible. Our students didn't know how to even think differently other than whatever they were doing, using Oracle or some other system, right? So in fast changing world, first thing we need to get rid of is we should get rid of an ambition for a secure job, because economy is dynamic, it's always progressing, it's prosperity is coming into many countries which otherwise had not seen prosperity. So as long as you can manage any job, because you have an education which makes you to solve the problems and learn on your own, you have a critical thinking and analytical ability, then which job you get into, it may not be important. What job interests you most, right? That's what you need to think of it. And if that's what drives, then your educational outing have to be customized. It automatically will happen in the digital world. So the last slide is what are the kind of exciting careers you can look for. First thing is most exciting aspect of the modern days, particularly post-COVID days, going to be that you are going to drive your own career rather than the market is driving the career. That's the first thing you should think of, right? For example, if you look at the post-COVID world, every organization, be small and large organizations, would be looking for, among themselves, people who can do a lot of quantitative analysis, right? And maybe a large group like Infosys, for example, rather than only computer science, Infosys already has language experts in addition to computer science, variety of different types of managerial expert other than the HR, right? They also now need epidemiologists among themselves, right? Because they have to deal with these kind of infections. They should know that there should not be any, they should not be able to, they should not get into a situation where they have to close down their entire operation just because 5 people got infected. So how to deal with epidemics is going to be something which every organization has to think about. It's not going to be just one central government has to think for the whole country. Every organization, every group has to think about it. Schools and colleges will have to worry about, with this one, because there are cases where if you have to close down your college or a university, it's going to be a big loss to the education system, and also it's a big loss to the revenue. You'll not be able to sustain the, schools and colleges very long, if everything has to be closed down, right? So the sustainability experts, all of these things happen because of climate change and environmental degradation and biodiversity loss and kind of stuff. So sustainability is going to be at top of our head for at least until we remember COVID-19. I hope we'll continue to remember, irrespective of how much is damage, because otherwise we will be getting into one more COVID-like situation in not so near future. Is simply because the environmental degradation and the climate change that's happening, it's too rampant, and then we may get into problem again and again, right? So sustainability is the most important, as where the natural resources have to be conserved, and the rivers and ocean and forest, all of these have to be well protected and expanded, not just protected, right? And there will be one more area in which there will be lots of interesting new outcomes will be because of the liberal arts education. In addition to domain specific information, like for example, you want to become an environmental scientist, but it's not enough to become an environmental scientist. You also need to know sociology, anthropology, and law, for example, right? Because you need to deal with the field. When you deal with the field, you can't be completely looking at only some plants and animals, right? Environment means the whole thing. As a cell biologist, you may be able to only keep looking at a cell. But as an environmental scientist, you will not be able to do only looking at some plants or animals and say I'm an environmental scientist. You need to have a more comprehensive understanding of the environment, which basically is people are also get involved, because people are affected and also they are damaging the environment. Some people are damaging the environment, some people, and everybody gets badly affected. So interdisciplinary expertise is going to be key, in any job. And your education should aim to develop those interdisciplinary skills so that you will get developed into a newer type of career prospect. So I'll stop here. I didn't specifically mention what kind of careers and all those things in more great detail, is simply because you have to think for yourself what you want to do, and accordingly we can think of a career of different kind. Communication is going to be a big prospect for new type of careers: science communication, environmental communication, climate change communication, or communication of information related to healthcare, how people should deal with themselves, right? For example, COVID-19, everybody is talking about wearing masks or this one, but how to stop the fake news. All of these things will come, right? So during the discussion and question answer, hopefully we can get some more questions. Sorry, I took longer than I thought. So stop here.
So thank you, sir, for the talk. Now we'll move on to the doubt section. If anyone has any doubts, you can type them out in the YouTube live chat and they will be addressed. So
if they don't have doubts, Chinmay, they can ask for any clarification or something which I didn't cover. So not necessarily it should be doubt.
Okay, sure, sir. So we'll start off with the doubts. Starting off with a question. Sir, why did you on a personal level chose to become a scientist, or what motivated you to become a scientist?
Okay. So many times, for everything, there's not necessarily be a predetermined, career path, right? It is always could be, something which during your studies or during your career, you may change your career path. So one thing was, I belong to a farmer's family. So I wanted to do agriculture in my studies. I went to an agriculture university. And those days, even today also, agriculture is actually a liberal arts. They teach sociology to natural sciences and agricultural sciences. So that helped me to think differently and think beyond, what I was learning through textbook, because of the way they're teaching and the kind of syllabi and curriculum we had, right? So, and some of the topics they were teaching, for example, you need to learn genetics if you want to understand plant breeding. In agriculture, central to agriculture is developing new varieties, which is dependent on entirely plant breeding. So in that plant breeding, the first thing they teach is Mendelian genetics. Then they teach quantitative genetics. Then they teach cytogenetics. Then they start teaching the molecular biology and what are genes, proteins, and so forth, right? And that actually helped me to, sort of develop more interest in biology, particularly the modern biology. And then, of course, went on and on. Okay, I'm done. Next question.
So the next question, could you please explain the most important points in the new national education policy that can affect science students?
So then one thing, which we have not yet discovered, one is, of course, there will be in the syllabi, there will be less of any particular discipline, because in a liberal arts program, you need to have some foundational language, you need to have a very broad coursework. Let's say in a 4-year degree program, which hopefully they're going to be a 4-year degree, not 3 years. There, one thing is for sure is there will be some research component in every undergraduate program, irrespective whether you want to become a researcher or do something else. But one way it's going to negatively affect is not every college or universities will be well, supported to run scientific research, because it's a bit expensive, it requires certain type of infrastructure, right? The second is it may affect more positively, it may impact more positively, because the larger number of students may start thinking, developing scientific methods as part of their, study. And scientific methods are useful everywhere, right? Scientific methods are just basically, unbiased observation, validation of your observation by, getting more observation or by doing experimentation, and these are the kind of rationality, scientific temperament, hopefully will, spread in the population.
So how will this policy affect science career choices in the future?
Okay, more specifically about the career choice, it actually may impact better, because many times science was always considered as more difficult, and and people always thought maybe I'll may take up some other job, or I'll just go for BA or BCom and kind of stuff. One advantage of changing the way we teach science, what's called the research-based pedagogy, or the inquiry-based learning, or analytical and critical thinking about some topic, that you become that science is all about this, right? It doesn't matter what is there in the textbook, how much we know about physics or chemistry. The science becomes easier, and more students, when they come, the kind of career they would be looking at in science will also increase, because the using the science addressing the problems of the society will go. So there'll be more and more jobs related to application of science to the society. It could be medical, it could be engineering, agriculture, it doesn't matter what it is. The second most important job that will be available for scientists in the modern days, particularly if you teach better with the help of new policy NEP, is addressing the sustainability issues. Now it's most clear that we had to somehow manage to conserve and natural resources, and you need science to help this, right? Because you need to have big data and analyze the data and find out which method of economy, which method of living will help to conserve natural resources in a larger area. It could be a big city, or it could be a whole district, right? And for that, you need scientists. So there will be more and more, jobs for scientists, or opportunities for scientists dealing with big data, dealing with solving the real life problems, and specifically related to sustainability.
So how do you see the NEP from the innovation point of view? Because in recent times, the culture of startups is starting to grow, and a lot of innovations are happening in our own country. So how do you see the NEP from that point of view?
The primary requirement of innovation is not money. We are putting too many things in the front, is putting the cart in front of the horse, right? So the cart alone is not good enough for innovation. The horse is more important here. The horse, basically the human, right? We are the one who need to be innovative in our way of thinking. So NEP is trying to change the education system right from the school days all the way up to the college. Let's say you go through 15 to 16 years of your school to college education. If 15 to 16 years of education is based on critical thinking, analytical ability, and innovative way of thinking, or creative thinking, you don't have to use the word innovation, just say creative thinking, right? Automatically, you will become innovative. I already gave the example that, with lakhs of, computer science engineers churned out from Indian engineering colleges, when it came to AI and ML, we are far, far, far behind. Everybody thought that next big revolution in computer science will happen from India. In 2020, 2000, when there was we shifted to new millennium, right? Everybody was thinking that India is going to be driver of the new computer science, but it didn't happen. The reason is we somehow, our education system did not allow us to innovate. That innovation comes from the way you get educated and how you critically think, right? Hopefully that will be changed by NEP, new education policy. Then all these startups and all, there are some facilitators for innovation, where they are not necessarily the primary driver of innovation. Primary driver of innovation is education, and hopefully that's where we are now solving the problem.
So changing the topic a little bit, how do we need to update ourselves with the current experimental methodology used in pursuing science?
Okay. Again, so it's, it depends on how you taught in the college, how your teacher is teaching. Let's say on your own you want to do it. Just go to Scientific American, let's say, or go to, some, TEDx talk or TED talk on some scientific concept. As you can see here, majority of the modern way of discovering science requires, one major methodology is use of data science, right? there are two advantages of using data science. One is, of course, you can drive the science much better because so much more data is already known, is all used, rather than using it a piecemeal. For example, if I'm only based on my memory, right, I would know one particular small part of the big problem, and based on that, I will try to answer some question. But maybe someone else, somewhere else in the world has already answered this question long ago, which none of us knew, or some of us didn't know, or we in parallel, at the same time as me discovering, someone else may also discover the same thing. There will be repetition of the work. The science will progress slowly. Whereas with the data science, you can actually incorporate everything that is known, available in the digital world, and you don't need to remember, whereas the computers will do all the analysis, right? Second important point here is we are all biased. Finally, we are all human beings. And one of the main traits of being scientists, you should be unbiased, right? You should be completely unbiased. And that's why it's because as a human being, there's always some bias. And a real human being a true scientist, 100%, unbiased is almost impossible, right? And which is what is affecting particularly medical science, health science, because typically our bias, if we get into medical and health science, the outcome will have a long-lasting impact because it may not be a good solution for the healthcare. So in that context, the data science, because it's the computer-based one, you can actually make it as unbiased as possible without any problem. And so your outcome will also be more productive, right? So as you can see here, one major scientific methodology which all the modern students who want to become scientists or aspiring to become scientists is actually learning data science, which most of us don't have because we are all truly experimental scientists, and there was nothing like data science when we were doing our PhD time or our masters.
So as today's talk is on Teachers Day, so I have a question for all the which can help all the teachers here. How can teachers working at elementary level participate in research carried at the highest level?
Very good question. So again, now what has happened here is there is what is known as collective science, right? So the science has become a large teamwork nowadays, right? So let's say related to health science or related to climate science, related to environment, right? Teachers along with their own students on their own, they actually can participate in collecting data, right? Local data, and analyze it, and then also compare with what is known in some other region, on similar kind of trends. And they can also participate in bigger team where everybody's data is collated with the help of people who are collecting all over. So the teachers, when they're teaching elementary genetics or environment or evolution or some particle physics or astronomy, they actually can participate in big science of so futuristic. For example, the LIGO project, actually, and particularly astronomy, the large number of school teachers in US, even some school teachers in India are directly participating in astronomy research, even when they're teaching at the school level some physics, right? It's because the modern digital world has enabled them to participate in mega science as a scientist, however small role they may play, but it's still valuable. That's one way of becoming scientist, even when you're teaching at the elementary level.
So moving on to the main topic, that is developing exciting careers in the post-COVID world. How can we stay motivated and find our true vocation in the COVID-associated uncertainties about the future?
Okay, so the certainty of the future is actually is always considered as, I told you, right? It's a roadblock for growth, for innovation, right? And uncertainty is the one which drives innovation, but you cannot create uncertainty which also damages the whole world and costs the livelihoods or lives, right? So you don't want situation like pandemic, but whatever the reason it started, right? There is a pandemic which is going around, and then the whole world is affected. Convert into an opportunity rather than considering that it is a black time, dark time. Nothing is happening. We don't know what's going to be post-COVID anything. One thing is sure is 99% of the people are not going to be affected in any way because of the pandemic, right? Because most of them are asymptomatic, those who have infections. You look at all the serosurveillance results are coming from all over the world, right? So many people don't know that they had an infection. They already had infection and gone, right? So that means the situation is not as bad as it was initially people thought of. The number of people who are going to be affected by infection and develop a disease is different than the infection. All of us may have infection but may not develop disease. Very small fraction of will develop disease. So all of us should have the motivation to do something, because it's like, if you want to go to Mumbai from Pune, through expressway, let's say in the pre-COVID time, when traffic is always heavy, there will always be some accident that will happen on the road. But they're not going to stop us going to Mumbai and do something. It could be for business, for education, for academic purposes, or for entertainment, right? So similarly, we should not be deterred by COVID, and simply by looking around the data coming out from all over the world, it says that it's going to be a smaller fraction of the people who are going to affect it. A larger fraction will remain, unaffected. And younger people are definitely not going to get affected, because it's older people who are more vulnerable to the disease, particularly those who have other comorbidities like diabetes and hypertension, which are usually old age problem, not the young age problem. So that should motivate all of us that the world is now will not be very different. We should actually do much better, because your motivation should be to stop such events in future, rather than worrying, sitting here now and see what happens. Because we know for sure that there will be a world after COVID-19, and most of us will be normal, although economy is maybe not so normal. But our motivation should be that do something so that such events will not happen again.
Sir, before moving on, I just like to ask, if we go little over 5 p.m., will that be okay for you?
I'm okay, thank you, no problem.
Okay, so moving on. What are the probable changes in the socio-economical culture in the post-COVID-19 world, and how will it affect scientific career opportunities?
Wow, it's a very complicated question. The socio-economic. So both it's nothing to do with COVID to some extent, right? COVID is not going to affect so much of these factors. What is going to be the main factor is the digitization of the world and access to information through digital methods, democratization of knowledge. That hopefully will reduce the inequality and increase the access to knowledge. See, if you know, I don't know how many of you read history. India is the one where the knowledge was somewhat limited to one particular socioeconomic group. So knowledge itself was not accessible to a very large group until recently. And although we, through democracy, through universal franchise and universal education, we try to impart higher education, both school and higher education to everybody, we still not been able to meet or bridge the gap between the poorer socioeconomic group versus the well-off socioeconomic group. But digitization is helping to reduce that gap, and that way may help in solving the problem. As far as COVID-19 specific concern, one thing is sure, that if an infection like this happens, right, everybody is going to get affected. It's not that I'm scientist and I'm knowledgeable, or I have access to money, I'm well off. Doesn't mean that I may not get an infection, I may not get affected. So at least we as a society has to live in the knowledge of possibility of such infection, and we need to sort out the problem for everybody if we have to live together without any such problems, right? It's not enough to say that I can be on my own irrespective of what happens to the society. And if an infection starts spreading, it's going to spread everywhere. Virus is not going to discriminate between different socioeconomic groups. That understanding has come now, and hopefully that will also philosophically and psychologically help us in coming, getting rid of socioeconomic, inequalities.
So, sir, as you said now, making knowledge accessible is a very important thing. And one of the major factors in it is communication, and in this case, science communication. So, what is the importance of science communication in the pre as well as post COVID times, and how can we highlight its importance?
Okay, so in the COVID time, the much of the emphasis on scientific is scientific temperaments. You should know about scientific discoveries, and then later people start thinking, okay, climate change is a major factor. You should communicate well. The science communication is important for talking about the climate change. The problem of climate change is it's still difficult for ordinary people to establish cause and effect relationship, right? So whatever I do here, why it should affect the global temperature? Earth is so big, it has so much of ocean, there is so much of ice sheets and everything. Why burning few things here and there, or me driving a car, two cars at home? Why it should add to the global warming? It was difficult phenomena to comprehend at the individual level, a big global problem. But what has helped this particular situation of the pandemic is science communication has regained its prominence, and people have realized that how important to know scientifically to deal with the pandemic, right? Irrespective of how many fake news, all kinds of quack medication was going around with the WhatsApp. Most people have ignored all of them. It's not that it reduced the fake news. Fake news have become like a humor or an entertainment in the pandemic time, because everything locked down, everybody is at home. Just exchanging some for fun fake news rather than actually people taking it seriously, because wearing masks, hand wash, and physical distancing are the most important scientifically validated methods of avoiding getting infected. And people really followed that. Most of them are followed. If they didn't follow because of a variety of other reasons, not because they were ignorant, it's simply because of negligence. That's different. The people realize that there is an importance to understand the science behind COVID-19. Even today, people want to know what is RT, what is R naught, right? Even whether they know anything about the science or virus. Even people at less educated, more educated, completely different domains of knowledge, like those maybe writing poem or maybe English literature or their language experts. They're also asking what is R naught today? What do you think R naught going to be for this particular virus, right? What is the infection fatality is going to be like? So that means science has actually become very prominent, and science communication is going to be taken very seriously. And most of you who are interested in science communication, develop those skills. Effective science communication is very important. You may have to use language agnostic method of communication, because language is a very time a barrier for science communication, right? So infographics, cartoons, small videos, animations, we need more such methods to communicate well the science, and there will be big career opportunities for those people.
Okay, so the next question here is, what are the research and entrepreneurship opportunities available for students after the COVID world? And how can students contribute to the Atmanirbhar Bharat schemes?
Okay, so this is something which already happening. I'll use the biology as an example, but it is accessible to all aspects of entrepreneurship. See, it was actually good and bad of COVID-19. The bad of it is every country is looking very inward looking, right? Because my country, I had to protect myself, but it's not going to work, because the virus can go and spread irrespective of how inward looking your country. You cannot completely seal the border and say I'm happy there, right? So there will be some problem will come from others also. So if every country has to cooperate with other countries, particularly countries which have a common border. You cannot live without having some good relationship between each other. that relationship is also based on the trade relationship, right? You cannot be completely devoid of trade relationship and say we two countries will happily live together, because there's always be some material that is produced in India of importance to another, your neighboring country, and something they produce or is maybe help us and it is required for us, right? We cannot separate those kind of relationship. For whatever the political reason, for whatever reason, let's say post-COVID, we are going to look at more inwardly, and because of the restricted trade, restricted movement, and caused because of the lockdown, we need to produce many things in-house, right? For example, in medicine, if you take diabetic one, metformin, almost the complete ingredient for this diabetic drug used to come from China, right? Even today, with all these problems we're having the China-India border, some of the pharmaceutical products are still coming from China. We are not stopped it. We may have stopped TikTok or PUBG or whatever, but we are not stopped medicine, import from China. It's because you cannot afford, because there's so many people, affected by diabetes, and we cannot, and also China, medicine is a bit cheaper. So this is where a lot of scope is there, innovation is having, opportunities are there, where India can start making indigenous diagnostic and medical products at low cost, at high quality, for India's purpose to start with, and hopefully it will also get into export. Many times what happens is, because anyway we are getting at low cost, some coming from outside, you don't have a scope for innovation. Entrepreneurs will not get into a new product unless there is a market, assured market, right? Why would any pharma company, small or big, will go to a market where everything is already captured by some other, organization, some other company or some other country? But now that there is a realization that more and more indigenous products are required. So Atmanirbhar is basically to become self-reliant, not necessarily to completely indigenize. Self-reliant is, in a time of situation, you should be able to sustain on your own everything that is required for the country. And at the same time, when it is under normal circumstances, you import and also export, right? So there should be an opportunity for that. So hopefully more and more companies, both small and medium one, you should be able to get into this. And there also new market will be available. For example, look at the diagnostic. Now everybody has realized the importance of doing RT-PCR based diagnostic for COVID-19, right? So many hundreds of companies are making reagents, making kits. Thousands of labs are now doing the testing. Very soon it will percolate to other ones. There is huge opportunities for those who have entrepreneurial, attitude to get into diagnostic of other diseases. There are so many diseases for which there hardly any diagnostics is done. You can provide low cost, high precision, high quality diagnostic using, let's say, nucleic acid based or protein based against a variety of different types of other neglected tropical diseases. Even cancer may become much easier to diagnose, early diagnosis, because more newer and innovative diagnostic methods can be developed because of the COVID-19 learning. And also our, we already done it now. If you can do it, why not do it another time also for other diseases?
Okay, so due to time constraints, we have to take the last question for today's session. If anyone has any doubts, you can email them to us. So the last question for today, what does it take to become a scientist? Does a person require any particular qualities inside him from birth to become a scientist, or can he develop it as he goes on? And can you give us some advice for the upcoming scientists and researchers attending this session?
See, as I told you, advice is somewhat bigger term. Assessing the situation and finding out what may happen in future, what are the possibilities that exist, is what we need to do it for ourselves, right? That's the main advice. Analyze the situation, unbiased way, and develop analytical skills, and then think for the future for yourself, and that will help you to, plan your career very well. There are two ways one can drive the career. One is you are very determined, very ambitious, and very motivated. Let's say I want to become, something irrespective of what other people are going to talk about, irrespective of how the situation is. I want to become a writer. I want to become a biologist or a physicist or a chemist or a wildlife photographer. It doesn't matter what you want to become. But there are opportunities now in this country to drive your own career based on your terms, right? Because of the variety of different things that are happening all the time. The second is you want to have a very comfortable and growing career, not just a stagnant career. You keep on doing something interesting more and more. When I say growing, doesn't mean that you become more and more, get more salary every 5 years or become a next level of person in the hierarchy of organization, that you become a CEO or a director or something. Growth is to do something more interesting all the time, right? So that you need to drive that, looking at the situation and make sure that the negative thing about the situation will not affect you so much. At the same time, you fully exploit the positive thing. That you need to be analytical in understanding the situation. You cannot be completely focused only on the problem that you're trying to solve, and then you may reach a dead end. You don't know how to deal with the system. You need to have an understanding of the system. It's very important, however good a scientist is. So the scientist cannot be completely focused. And the third most important is work as a team, do collaborations, and individual driven science, you can only do so much, right? And it may give you a little bit of more, because in olden days there was an Einstein or this Nobel Prize and all those things, that those will not become very useful these days, because that kind of science we are not doing. Everybody is part of a big team, big collaboration. So your ability to do work in a team is more important. Those skills also one has to develop. I'm done. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for addressing all the questions. Over to Nayan now.
Thank you, Chinmay. Hello, everyone. My name is Nayan Gogari, and I will be proposing the vote of thanks for today's special session. On behalf of Team TSSN and all participants, I extend our gratitude to Professor L.S. Shashidhara, who took out valuable time from his busy schedule and inspired us with his thoughts and experiences. I am certain that each one of us feels enlightened and inspired to choose a career in science, despite the challenges the COVID-19 pandemic has posed before us. Thank you once again, sir. I would also like to thank the director and team of Eukaryotic Gene Expression and Function Research Group and friends from Bangladesh for their support to this event. A big thanks to all the participants as well. It was wonderful having you all. I would also like to extend a special thanks to our mentor, Dr. Santosh Dikshit, who has been a part of the TSSN journey since its beginning. Lastly, every event requires teamwork, so I would like to thank my team members here at TSSN for making this session a great success. We request you to keep supporting the TSSN activities. Thank you. Before we disperse, I would just like to add a point. We will be giving out the feedback forms. We will put the link for the feedback forms in the chat section. Do fill it out and let us know. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity.